Hello, everyone. Welcome back after, I hope, what was a delicious lunch. I'm Pieter Haak. I'm a senior technology reporter at Politico here in Europe. And we're joined here today by two colleagues from the other side of the Atlantic. First, it's, of course, US colleague Chase. Hi, Chase. Welcome in Brussels. And we're also joined here by US Senator Gary Peters. Thanks very much for being here and for making all the way to Brussels. How do you find it so far?
Oh, it's amazing. I love the city. It's beautiful. It's great to be here, and I'm going to be sad when I leave.
Okay, that's great to hear. Together with the Senator, we will discuss EU-US relations on the tech side. And we have to say, of course, the last year there was a lot of agony between the EU and the US in the area of tech. We've seen the Trump administration really slamming the EU's Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act. So a lot of tensions, but maybe there is also a common challenge that the EU and the US can tackle together. We've seen, of course, Anthropic releasing their Mythos model, which is said to have a lot of, super hacking even capabilities. So yeah, I think that's really something that we can tackle in this conversation, because one could say that this whole saga around Anthropic's Mythos model could be some sort of opportunity for the EU and the US maybe to team up together to address these concerns around cybersecurity and also maybe about sharing access to the model and really tackling that issue. What is your take on that? Is that a way for the EU and the US to come together and find common ground?
Well, I hope so, because I think we have to. There's no question what we have seen with Mythos is really a paradigm shift in a lot of ways, that we realize the power of this model. We should also realize that this is not going to be the last model that has that kind of power. We're going to see the other companies will come along probably fairly quickly. First off, I want to say I appreciate that Anthropic did not release it, given what we believe are the capabilities, or at least what we have been told about the capabilities. My team has had some briefings on this. And clearly, this is a threat to long-standing software that's out there that could be used by folks with nefarious intent. That's the downside. The good side, it's also an incredible tool to be used to protect cyber as well going forward. But I also think we have to understand that companies don't have to hold this back. There's no reason, there's no legal reason why Anthropic couldn't have just released it. It would have been totally irresponsible to do that given the circumstances, so I appreciate what they did. But we have to think that this is just going to be one model of others that are going to go forward. So how do we come together and share perspective on this, to share information on this? I think the problem is very large. We can't do it ourselves. The United States can't. The European Union. You also have to get the providers, the AI labs themselves, everybody coming together to think this through is the only way they're going to be able to proceed. That's why I'm here. You know, I do a lot of work with AI. I've got some of my AI team here with me here in Europe, and we want to learn more about what's happening here as the regulation, and now we're in the process where there'll be amendments and some changes coming forward, kind of how we see that. But really, how do we find some kind of middle ground? You know, in the past, the United States, or currently, has taken kind of a hands-off approach, particularly with the Trump administration, is to not to do anything, just let AI companies do what they want, and hope that all works out well, versus the European approach, which is to lean in, and particularly on safety issues, and to make sure it's being used responsibly. And some folks think that's too far. Probably doing nothing is too far. So how do you find that middle ground? And to your point, that's where we have to come together and have these kinds of conversations. How do we make sure that these AI tools can do all of the wonderful things that we certainly are hoping that they can do, but at the same time making sure they're being done in a responsible way, and safety is a key component in that development.
You know, Senator, as you're having meetings, in the EU on this trip, I mean, what are you hoping to hear from EU partners, particularly on this issue of AI evaluations? Obviously, we've seen the Trump administration is now considering some form of possibly pre-release evaluation of models. We'll see where that goes. But what are you kind of hoping to hear from EU partners about evaluations and kind of the role of government in that as part of this trip?
Well, part of just learning what is the view here. How do they see that going forward? How that would progress? You mentioned the Trump administration may have a different view. That was recently reported in a major newspaper today, so it's very new, really fresh news. But it's all from unnamed sources, and we didn't hear that directly from the president. And as I read the article, is they may form a work group to take a look at that. Certainly, they were not doing that prior to Mythos, so that was the game changer, is that, okay, wow, this is something we have to be really concerned about, so maybe we do need to make sure there's something up front. I'll wait till I see it. You know, a quote that the president made previously and was in the article was that President Trump said, regulation has to be more brilliant than the technology itself. That's a pretty high standard, to be more brilliant. We usually, and I'm a policymaker, it's hard to have, to be able to lean into that kind of brilliant policymaker in a technology that's changing so rapidly and evolves so rapidly. It's tough to try to even catch up, let alone try to get ahead of it. So if that's the standard, that's not going to be an achievable standard, and that could be a reason for not doing anything, which would be a real mistake if that's going to be the position that they're going to take. So how does European regulators, how do they look at that? How do they want to get involved in that? What lessons could we learn? What's positive? What's negative? But we also know that there's a real, it's an asymmetric kind of situation here. When you're looking at the AI labs and what goes into these models, the people that work there versus regulators, are we going to have those kinds of resources? The government's probably not going to have those resources. We certainly can't pay people the amount of money that they make at these companies. I mean, they're literally in a salary arms race with massive amounts being paid to incredibly talented people who are developing these models. We need to have really good regulators. We have good regulators, but how do you win that battle to make sure our regulators have the same kinds of skills to be able to really truly evaluate what these models can actually do? And that's why I say that it's got to be partnership. We've got to be partners with our friends here in Europe, but we also have to have the companies as a part of this and figure out what that model may be.
But would you say that the EU is a credible partner? Because the EU has already said that they don't have access to Mythos. They're even desperately seeking to get access. Would you then say, like, okay, this is a credible partner with whom we can have a conversation, or not?
Well, we got to get to that point where that's the case. You know, it's been shared primarily, as you know, with a number of the leading U.S. companies that have a lot of software out there. The UK it's been shared with the UK. But we want to, certainly I'd love to explore why is it not being provided to folks here in Europe as well? Because you've got to be part of the solution. There's just no question about it in my mind.
Because to me it feels a bit like that at the moment the US has the access and the EU has the rules, but not the other way around. Because in the EU you have the AI Act, which already details some requirements around mitigating cybersecurity risks. Is that, for example, a model that you could also, that you're interested in bringing to the US?
So I don't know if it's certainly part of the model. I don't know if that is the answer. Because I mean, I get, as a policymaker in the United States, I hear about how problematic the rules are for our companies for a variety of reasons. So I want to get to the bottom of that. I want to get the other side of the story. One thing I've learned in politics, there's always two sides to every story. So what's the other side of the story? And then how do we come together to find what that common ground may be?
Senator, you know, since you're the senator from Michigan, automobile manufacturing powerhouse, I'm curious to get your thoughts on the burgeoning field of autonomous vehicles, particularly when it comes to passenger vehicles. Obviously, there's a lot of that in my home state of California with Waymo and, frankly, a lot of others now. But now you're also starting to see in all across the country testing and even operationalizing of big rigs and larger vehicles that can do delivery autonomously for large stretches of road. I mean, this is an issue that gets into interstate commerce, which is an area the federal government obviously has purview over. I'm curious, you know, coming from Michigan, how you see that rollout and what kind of federal framework, if any, you'd like to kind of see in place to make sure that that is a safe rollout, but also a rollout that maybe respects the job side of that, because there's a lot of particularly union roles in trucking and other kinds of driving as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's complicated, but I think it's really very related to the discussion we're having right now about Mythos and other kinds of AI products that are coming out, because basically self-driving cars is an AI product. It's in the physical world. So it's not just in the coding world, it's in the physical world. That has to have real world implications. If something goes wrong, people actually die. They could get into, and the idea is to have this technology to save lives. And before I address some of the question, that's what attracts me to self-driving cars, is the fact that we know that 95% of all of the accidents on the road are human error. and that with these technologies have the not only the possibility or actually demonstrating the fact you can eliminate those accidents with these technologies. In the United States, as you know, we lose close to 40,000 people every year on our highways that die. Every day, almost 100 people die. And so if this technology is deployed and it can be deployed at scale, it'll literally save tens of thousands of lives, not to mention an even larger number of people who suffer from debilitating injuries as a result of car accidents. But it's an example of that doesn't work without artificial intelligence. You know, the sensors that are coming in from cameras and LiDAR and communications between cars, that all has to be processed in an AI system that's able to pull all that together in real time, drive a car through a city street here in Brussels or New York City safely in order to do that. But we have to develop it, and you have to develop that in an industry that's pretty heavily regulated. So the auto industry is very regulated. The national safety standards are very regulated. Cars have to meet all of these standards before they're allowed to go out onto the road, and that's all pre-testing. They have to certify that. But as we were looking at how do you develop self-driving cars, we want to put them out on the road, but they're not going to meet a lot of the standards that exist for a regular car. And so there's a waiver that's allowed right now that allows a certain number to get out. You can see them in California and San Francisco and LA, Austin, Texas, the other cities, Detroit starting to see some to do that. But we need to be able to scale that for the automakers, so we have to develop regulations to do that. So how do you do regulations with technology that's changing rapidly? Whatever we do now it may be obsolete soon. Plus, to go through the rulemaking process for a regulation in the United States can take several years sometimes. This technology is happening now. You can't wait to do that. So we're working on a framework that would be self-certification, where the industry would certify that their car meets certain kind of broad standards that can be changed depending on time, so they can get out onto the road as quickly as possible. Because the amount of data that you collect on the road far exceeds anything you can do in a test track environment. And then you collect more data, and then you can refine the regulations in a real-time way to go forward to make sure that these cars are safe. I will say that some folks worry about self-certification. They're like, well, can you trust the company to do that? We have to, but I will say you do get a lot of companies that are highly motivated to make sure that they're putting safe cars out on the road, because if there's an accident on the road, you will definitely read about it in the media. It'll be like a top story that a self-driving car is an accident, someone was injured. And that's in an environment where 100 people die every day on our roads. That never gets reported. Every single day, 100 people die, and then it doesn't get reported. But the self-driving car is something different about an accident with a machine than it is with a human driver that's negligent in some way. And so the auto companies know that. They're investing billions of dollars into this technology. The last thing they want are to be on the front page that their technology is not working. That could risk substantial investments. So they want to make sure that whatever they're certifying is indeed safe as much as possible before it gets out onto the road. But I'll just say, sorry about the other, these are big questions. The other piece, though, that is really complicated, you brought up the job aspect, which is an important aspect, particularly with large trucks. And in some ways, the technology is easier with trucks on a highway because there's less variables on a highway, our interstate highway, than there would be on a city street. But there's a lot of jobs. So there's several million jobs in America that are people who drive. I believe it is the #1 job category in 27 states. So the potential employment impact is massive. As you can imagine from a political standpoint, the Teamsters Union, which represents professional drivers in the United States, are very concerned about that. And we have to think deeply about the employment impacts and the dislocation that's going to occur. Those discussions are just starting, but they have to happen. It's not going to happen overnight. We're not going to see self-driving vehicles put out overnight, but it will happen, and there will be still people that will have to be involved in that self-driving. But there will be employment dislocation that we have to be thinking about.
in Europe, there are not a lot of applications yet of self-driving cars. I think the Netherlands was the first country last month that gave some licenses or the go to Tesla to apply self-driving applications. Do you have any learnings for European countries, European policy makers, how they have to allow this onto their roads, and what the framework you mentioned, can that something be that European policymakers and politicians can also adopt to deploy this technology in Europe?
Yeah, I think so. I think that with things that we've been doing, and hopefully what we're going to be putting forward, would all be models for the Europeans. I think it's essential to do it because it does represent the future of the auto industry. It's not just the United States that's investing. The Chinese is investing massive amounts in self-driving cars. They see this as the future of transportation. And I would think that certainly Europeans want to be at the center of the future of transportation as well, the auto industry. You have a very proud history of automakers in Europe. And the important thing about the auto industry, too, is that the autos are not just the auto industry, it's just about every other industry. You don't have a strong manufacturing sector in your country if you don't have a strong auto sector. It's really important because all the supply chain, from rubber for tires to glass for windshields, I mean, just go through the list of all the things that are in automobiles. You want those all produced in your country as well. So you want to be able to make those cars. The one thing I've been really pressing in the debate for self-driving cars is that I want the tech platforms to use American cars. As a guy from Detroit, you want to make sure those are American automobiles that are being used, and they have to work together, and they are. They're working together. We were talking earlier about U.S. manufacturers working with the tech companies. I'll just say when I first got involved a few years ago in AI, I was out in San Francisco with one of the big companies, and they were saying to me, you know, we're designing the computer systems and the AI systems to pilot this car through a busy street. And, you know, we thought, you know, maybe we should just make the cars too. We're doing all the computer stuff, let's make the cars. And then they said, well, then we went to Detroit and we went to an auto factory. Wow, that's really a complicated business. So I'm like, yes, it's a really complicated business, but you have to partner. Obviously, the auto companies have to partner with the tech companies because that's a really complicated business. But it's got to be a national effort to come through. And what you'll find is not only will you spur manufacturing of automobiles and just basic, you know, metal and manufacturing skills and precision manufacturing, you'll also advance your tech sector because you'll be developing the AI systems that actually pilot. So it's a twofer. You get an advancement in technology, an advancement in manufacturing, and the Europeans have to be as concerned about that as we are in the United States. Certainly the Chinese get it because that's why they're investing a lot of money. And I don't think the Europeans want to be left behind in the next big thing for transportation.
Yeah. We only have a few minutes left here, but you know, can you talk us through a little bit, just kind of what you'd like to see more about the state of AI integration in the federal government? This is an issue that you've obviously worked on a lot as well, and maybe in the kind of waning minutes here, a message that you're kind of, the gospel you're trying to spread a little bit as far as AI and AI adoption while you're in Europe in terms of what we all do in the United States.
Well, we have to work on making sure as we're adopting AI that people actually trust it and understand that we're thinking deeply about some of the issues that are going to occur with it. I just want to mention, you know, there is a huge growing political movement in the United States they call it, you know, AI populism. That the people in the United States are very fearful about what AI actually means in their lives. You know, we have data centers that are being put out around the country. The major protests are associated with that. People are very concerned about that. You may have read the attack on Sam Altman's house with a Molotov cocktail. We've had a state legislator in another state whose house was shot several times, someone who was concerned about a data center being put up. If you look at public opinion polls, the view is a whole lot different from the public than it is from AI experts. In fact, a recent Stanford study showed that 75% of experts believe that AI has got this amazing future and it's wonderful. And if you ask an everyday citizen, only 25% of people think that. So 75% have a completely negative view of that. And are concerned about the job impacts, about privacy, all the things that folks here in the EU are working on. But that'll have major political implications when it comes to actually trying to figure out how we take those next steps forward. And the other thing that's really important, which may have something to do with what we saw with what we saw in the paper today about maybe the administration's taking another look at this, is that it is bipartisan. There's not a lot in the United States that's bipartisan. It's very polarized right now, and yet almost an equal number of Republicans are concerned about AI as Democrats, and it's a majority in both parties, and that number is likely to increase going forward. So I think we are at a real pivotal moment for us. We have AI rapidly moving up and going to be very disruptive if we're not careful about how we think that through at a time where the angst with the public is also ramping up rapidly as well. And when you put those two on a collision course, it becomes incredibly politically unstable and is not a place where I don't think any country wants to be.
Maybe to close off, because we're almost reaching the time limit. If you're here in Brussels and you're meeting with policymakers and politicians, as I said, the ties between the EU and the US on tech are a bit strained at the moment. Do they welcome you with open arms, or is it a bit more icy than before?
No, everybody's always friendly, and so it's open arms. You know, I come here to try to figure out how we find common ground and you know, celebrate. It's not about just looking what's bad; it's about celebrating what's good and how can we.
So
we
you
learn
come
from
in
each
peace,
other.
to say.
I come in peace,
Okay.
exactly.
Thank you very much for this very insightful remarks. That is happening as well. We will continue discussion after a quick stage change. We will have a panel on AI global governance. But again, Mr. Peters, thanks for coming here and for your insightful comments.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.